In my video showing off some of the Japanese RPGs I got my hands on in 2018, some of you asked if there were any English releases for them. Most of them, unfortunately, were Japan only. Among them, though, there is a few that do have fan translations, and Meikyuu Kingdom is one of them, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Meikyuu Kingdom is a game that takes place 2,000 years after an event called the Dungeonification. The name is exactly what it sounds like. The world became a dungeon, much like the sort you'd find in a PlayStation-era dungeon crawl role-playing game. And if you haven't guessed it, this game is silly. The players in this game take the role of landmakers, extraordinarily powerful people with the force of will necessary to bring some order to the otherwise chaotic landscape the world has become. And this brings us to the name of the game. You make a kingdom that is a safe haven for your people. Meikyuu Kingdom is equal parts kingdom management and dungeon crawl game, with tables and charts for days featuring all kinds of random elements. Tables such as random events that happen to the kingdom while you were out spelunking, things that go wrong as you're wandering through the dungeon, or even random names for just about everything. Meikyuu Kingdom mixes in Japan's unique and whimsical charm to the sort of old-school style tabletop gaming that was prevalent in the 80s and 90s. As of this recording, there's no official release for Meikyuu Kingdom. Everything I know is from a fan translation that's been floating around on the internet for a while. The fan translation, however, is not complete. Much of the game's setting information is missing, and there's spelling and typographical errors abound. Luckily, I have legitimate copies of the books, so we can at least indulge in some of the charming artwork the game has. An official English release was announced some time ago, but it's been years since there have been any updates. In that time, a new edition of Meikyuu Kingdom was released in Japan, meaning if the official release ever happens in English, it'll probably be outdated. With all that said though, let's go into character creation and how to play. Get comfortable, cause this might get a little long. Character creation comes in two major steps in Meikyuu Kingdom. First, you create the kingdom, then each player makes their character who is a member of the royal court. Kingdom creation is relatively easy in Meikyuu Kingdom. It's primarily a matter of rolling on various tables and recording the results, some of which you can safely ignore or choose for yourself. I won't go over all the individual charts and steps. There's a lot of them, and most of them come down to roll the dice and consult the chart based on what comes up. In fact, in an earlier draft for this, I did precisely that, and this video would have wound up much longer than it needed to be. So what I will say is this. You'll need somebody to keep track of everything that comes up on these charts, since there's a lot of charts and lots of rolls will be made. Don't worry if all the information seems overwhelming at first, it'll all come together as you go through playing the game. Follow the steps as they're presented, and you'll be just fine. That said though, there is some information that is handy to have up front. First is that Meikyuu Kingdom uses d6s in some unusual ways with what we call d6-6 rolls. The way these work is that you roll 2d6 and your higher number is going to be treated as the ones place, and the lower of the two will be the tens place. So, a roll of 6 and 2 would become 26. Further, when you're rolling on the charts to determine the kingdom's attributes, the things you'll definitely want to keep note of are any talents and facilities that come up. These are all things you'll be using to come up with the initial layout of your kingdom, as well as your starting population. And the formula for your starting population, by the way, is calculated as follows. 50 plus the number of player characters, plus the number of talents, plus any other increases to citizen count, such as from monster citizens. It's very likely that based on this formula, you're going to start with a kingdom level of 2, meaning you'll start with 2 points to add to your kingdom attributes. The 4 kingdom attributes, by the way, are lifestyle, culture, order, and military. If you're unsure of which of these to raise, we'll cover them in more detail a bit later on. Finally, your kingdom starts with no money and 10 voices of the people. After all this has been settled, you can move on to character creation. As with kingdom creation, this involves rolling on various charts, though there is a little bit more element of choice involved. First of all, you're going to roll 2d6 for your character's background. This is equal parts story element, as well as giving you a mission to fulfill during the course of the game. Missions such as slaying 50 of a particular kind of monster, raise the kingdom's stats to a certain level, or finding a long-lost family member somewhere in the dungeon. As an extra incentive to fulfilling this goal, though, your character can level up once upon its completion. The next step is to choose your character's class and job. Class is your character's role in the royal court, and is chosen by discussing it with the rest of the players. Job, by contrast, is randomly determined. You can determine these in any order that you wish. The 6 classes are King, which is the most important member of the court. The king has the final say on all decisions and is a unifying force for the kingdom. Without them, there is no kingdom. Knight, who is in charge of the defense of the kingdom, they determine what strategies the kingdom will use in battle and are naturally very adept at fighting. Their primary stat is warfare. The Vizier, who is the one that keeps the kingdom running. They're in charge of the finances, managing the issues of the people, and are in general an aid to the king. Their primary stat is wit. Oracle, who is the religious leader of the kingdom. They're similar to the Vizier in that they manage the affairs of the people, but they're more focused on soothing their woes. The primary stat of the Oracle is charisma. Ninja, they are the ones that gather information for the kingdom. Whenever the court is about to enter the dungeon, the ninja is the one responsible for scouting beforehand. Their primary stat is quest. And finally, there's servant. Then there's the servant. They're a jack of all trades, they have no set role, and they can be thought of as either assistants to other members of the court or lesser governing officials. The names of the classes are more descriptive of what role they serve in the kingdom. The king doesn't necessarily have to be a red-robed old man with a pointed crown. The king could just as easily be a pirate captain, their vizier the first mate, and the knight a sergeant of arms. Your class determines what skills your characters can learn, as well as what your ability scores are. Characters have 4 ability scores: wit, charisma, quest, and warfare. Servants start with 2 in all of these stats, while the king gets to assign the numbers 4, 4, 1, and 0 to the stats as they see fit. Meanwhile, the Vizier, Oracle, Ninja, and Knight get 4 in their primary stat, and 2, 2, and 1 to assign everywhere else. This means that the servant truly is a jack of all trades, while the king has 2 areas they'll excel in, but are poor at everything else. And each other class is good at their primary role, and sort of balanced at everything else. Additionally, your class also determines some of your character's starting equipment. To determine your character's job, you use the D66 method, and your job grants you a few things. First, each job has an associated skill. If you somehow change your character's job, you lose this skill and gain your new job's associated skill. Second, each job also has an associated ability score. You gain 1 point in that ability score, and much like your associated skill, changing your job changes this ability score. Each job also has a few associated skill groups, which are lists of further skills that you can learn from leveling up. Finally, your job determines yet more equipment that you can start with. If your character's class is servant, you're allowed to roll for a second job, complete with everything that entails. Another job skill, the ability score increase, and the extra items. With your class and job chosen and your ability scores assigned, you then get to add 1 final discretionary point to any of your 4 attributes, and then you calculate your derived ability scores. I'll leave the formula for these on the screen for a little bit. As with kingdom attributes, we'll cover all the character attributes in more detail later. After determining your attributes, you may roll on the starting equipment table a number of times equal to your character's wit, but bear in mind you can normally only carry 6 items. So from the no doubt massive list of items you're going to start with, you only get to pick 6 of them. During character creation, you also randomly determine your character's relationship with one other character. Pick another character randomly, then roll for the subtype of that relationship. At character creation, characters only have affection towards each other, though random events during play might cause them to gain hostility or affection towards other characters. The final step is to determine your character's likes and dislikes from the random words table. You roll once on all 4 charts using the same method as determining your job. After you have your 4 words, you put 2 to be your character's likes, 2 to be their dislikes, and you are finished with character creation. Meikyuu Kingdom has simple dice mechanics. You roll 2d6 and add the relevant ability score. Most often this will happen as a result of something an item, skill, or any other chart tells you to do. With that said though, let's go ahead and go over what the different ability scores mean. First, the 4 kingdom attributes. Lifestyle refers to the wealth and opulence of the kingdom. This is useful if you want to be able to easily acquire items. Culture is the education and ideals of the kingdom. It represents how rich the customs of the kingdom are, and it's a measure of how many times per session you can use the skills of the kingdom's talents. Order is the overall safety and social stability of the kingdom. This is useful for preventing disasters, as well as increasing population. Military is one that's somewhat inconsistent in the fan translation, since sometimes it comes up as warfare. But whatever it's referred to as, it represents the kingdom's ability to wage war. It's useful because it lets you regain followers that you lose in the dungeon. The kingdom attributes most often come up in the use of facilities or random events. As for characters, they have 4 ability scores as well. Wit, which is your character's cleverness and their ability to think on their feet. It's primarily used for determining your character's starting items, as well as exploring rooms and deciding who goes first in combat. It factors into the character's capacity as well. Charisma, which is how good looking your character is, their force of personality, and the overall ability to influence people. It's used for exchanging with friendly monsters and factors into capacity and how many followers you're allowed to have with you. Quest is a character's ability to find things. It's used for searching and investigating rooms, as well as exploring the dungeon. It factors into a character's defense. Warfare is a character's general ability to fight, be it with swords, guns, or other implements. It's used for making attack rolls and also factors into HP. Each one of these abilities also correlates to one of the kingdom attributes as well. Wit correlates to lifestyle, charisma to culture, quest to order, and warfare to military. Finally, the character's derived ability scores are HP, capacity, defense, and follower count. HP is, if you're somehow unaware, your character's life force. If it hits 0, they become unconscious. This is calculated by warfare plus quest plus 5 plus your character level. Capacity is described as your character's generosity as a human, and it's akin to willpower from other games. It determines the maximum amount of drive that a character can have, and it's calculated by wit and charisma divided by 2. You start with no drive, but the amount doesn't reset between sessions, and there's also a lot of skills that make use of drive. Defense is, as its name implies, your ability to avoid getting hit in fights. You calculate it as quest plus 7. Max followers is how many ordinary people you can have following you into the dungeon, and it's calculated by your charisma times 5 plus your level. Followers normally allow you to add 1 to the result of a roll at the cost of losing 1d6 of them. There's also numerous skills that make use of followers as well. Skills are part of what makes each character in Meikyuu Kingdom unique. You gain 1 skill from your class at the start of the game, and any jobs your character has come with an associated skill list. And every time your character levels up, you learn another one from either your class's skill list or the skill lists associated with your character's job. As mentioned earlier, many skills are reliant on how many followers you have, if not outright using followers as a cost for the skill. More often though, skills will refer to using hope. Hope comes in 2 forms, drive and voices of the people. Voices of the people is a shared resource possessed by the kingdom. Everyone has to agree to using it. It's a good idea to be careful about using Voice of the People, and not just because it's a shared resource. If Voice of the People ever gets too low, you have to start rolling on the Kingdom Disaster table. You roll on it if the amount of the Voice of the People falls below the amount of landmakers playing, and again if it's ever used while below that threshold, and again if it ever hits 0 or needs to be used and is currently at 0. This can easily spiral into a complete and utter catastrophe, since some of the effects on the table can result in yet more Voices of the People being lost. Additionally, Voice of the People also influences how much money is received by the kingdom at the end of an adventure, meaning if you squander your Voices of the People, it'll be that much harder to build the kingdom up. Drive, on the other hand, is a character's personal reserve of hope, and the maximum they can have is determined by their capacity. Drive doesn't have any negative consequences for using, and it's somewhat easier to recover. If during a check one of your dice comes up as 6, you can discard that dice to gain 1 point of drive. This means that if you were to roll a 6 and a 3 for a result of 9, you could discard a 6 to gain that drive, but your new result would be 3. In addition to being used to fuel skills, hope can also be spent to gain extra dice when rolling for checks. However, in this situation, only the 2 highest dice count. You could also use it to raise the amount of damage an attack does by 1d6. Since Meikyuu Kingdom is a game from Japan, it has a very structured method of play. There's 2 phases that this game is broken up into, the Kingdom phase and the Dungeon phase. The Kingdom phase is where the court makes preparations for the coming adventurer. The first thing that happens is that the GM gives the court the prologue. Simply put, it's the setup for the session's adventure. Mechanically, it doesn't do much. It just sets up the story and establishes why the court is venturing into the dungeon. Then is the organizational meeting. This is where the court discusses how many followers they should take into the dungeon with them. The final call on who gets how many followers goes to the king. After that is the treasury step, which is led by the vizier. There's 2 things that go on here. The kingdom's funds are used to build corridors and facilities, and items are distributed. And after the treasury step is when characters are allowed to use plan timing skills, craft items using materials, make use of a facility, scout out the dungeon, or wander about the kingdom aimlessly. Scouting the dungeon, though, is something I think requires a little bit of extra detail. Scouting requires having followers, and also puts these followers at risk, but is very much worth it in the long run. Because typically, the layout of the game's dungeon is completely unknown, as are the number of traps and monsters present in each room. The process of scouting goes as follows. You determine how many followers you want to send out and what room they'll explore. You can only explore rooms that are adjacent to ones that you've already explored. And if there's no rooms that have been explored yet, the GM decides one at random for you to start it. You then make what's known as the command check. This is done using either quest or wits, and it is against the number of 7 plus the number of rooms you've explored plus the number of followers you've lost. If you succeed, the GM reveals to you how many monsters are in the room, how many traps are in that room, and what corridors connect to that room. If you fail, you lose a number of followers equal to the amount that you failed by. So long as you have at least 1 follower left though, you still get all the information as if you succeeded. If you still have followers left, you can choose to keep exploring or to quit. Each character only gets 1 action during this particular phase though, so if you quit scouting, that's it. You're not doing anything until the dungeon phase. Once everybody has had a chance to do something during this phase though, that's when you begin the journey into the dungeon. For every tile you need to move into that isn't part of yours or another kingdom's territory, you need to roll on the travel events table, which, like every other table, has all sorts of different possible results. I wasn't kidding when I said this game had charts and tables for days. After the court arrives at their destination, the dungeon phase begins. The dungeon phase is where the more familiar things happen, where characters explore rooms, encounter monsters, deal with traps, and make sure they don't starve to death or overeat. Resolving each room typically goes like this. If there's any monsters in the room, the court has to deal with them first. Monsters can be hostile, neutral, or friendly. Friendly monsters can be safely ignored. You can either exchange information and materials with them, or even recruit some of them to join you. Characters with high charisma will be useful for these endeavors. Though if you're particularly bloodthirsty, you can always pick a fight with them. Hostile monsters, on the other hand, must always be fought. Worse, if you encounter hostile monsters in a room you haven't explored beforehand, they get a surprise attack on you. Neutral monsters are where, you guessed it, a random chart comes into play. You roll on the chart, and there's a chance that you can offer them something to make them friendly instead of having to fight them. Once monsters are dealt with, the court then makes camp. This is where any exchanges with friendly monsters would occur, Any plan timing skills can be used, or you can explore the room and see what it has to offer. Otherwise, characters have the option to rest, where they choose a stat and roll for that stat's relevant rest table for more random things to happen. If the court would prefer to skip the camp step though, somebody could make a charisma roll to rush through. This is against 7 plus 1/10 of the court's followers. After the camp step is completed, or skipped, you move on to the next room and continue this process until the objective for the dungeon has been completed. After the dungeon has been completed, there's still a few things left to do. If you guessed that they involved more random charts, you'd be correct. The Kingdom Change table represents stuff that either happened while the court was out, or things that happened as they returned. It can include such things as talents moving in, catastrophes ruining facilities, or booms in the population. This is a chart that everybody on the court rolls on. Once the Kingdom Change table has been rolled on by everybody, a final bit of bookkeeping is performed. The Kingdom gains money equal to the Kingdom level plus half the voices of the people, and depending on how long the court was in the dungeon, or other things that happened during the Kingdom phase, that money is then spent on expenses. Any money left over though can be spent to buy things like rare items from allied kingdoms or materials, as well as territories from the dungeon they explored this session, or even additional facilities and corridors. And after all the money has been spent, if there's any left over, only an amount equal to the kingdom's lifestyle level is allowed to be carried over to the next session. This is also where you recalculate the kingdom's population based on how many were left behind, how many were lost in the dungeon, and how many might have been gained at any other time. After all that bookkeeping has been done, everybody then votes on who they believe the most valuable player for that game was. And the sort of things you should consider for this are who fulfilled their class role the best, who was the best role player, and who helped the game go along smoothly. Finally, if the court achieved their goal for this session and their current level is lower than the kingdom level, they level up, gaining a new skill and a few improvements to their different stats. This game has a lot going on. I glossed over a lot of the finer points since there's just so many individual steps to everything in this game. It makes concisely explaining how to play this game a little difficult. The other side of that though, is that this gives the game structure. You can easily follow the steps if you're unsure about what needs to happen next. In fact, this game has a lot of structure. There's not a lot of room to deviate, and Meikyuu Kingdom can really only be used to run one sort of game. A group of adventurers who happen to be the royal court of a kingdom, taming a wild land. I've personally always liked having structure and boundaries in creative endeavors though. It's not until I have my options limited that I can really get creative. For example, if we were to instead make the game about a pirate crew, what elements would need to change? Pirates aren't known for being a land-dwelling people, but open oceans would make the dungeon no longer a dungeon. So then the body of water they would need to be on would need to be more like a series of navigable rivers and creeks. I digress though. This is also the sort of game that you would get a lot more enjoyment out of if you can commit a few sessions to it, which is a rare occurrence for games from Japan. And finally, I'd like to end this video with a non sequitur. One of the jobs in this game is called the Happy Mancer. They're a wizard, and they make people happy. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting or helpful, give me a thumbs up like. And if you want to learn more about other great tabletop games from around the world, feel free to subscribe. With all that said, I am Audionautix, and I will see you all next time.